All right, Brian, there's sand in the air. Up next on the Handy Guys podcast, we're talking about every possible sander you could ever own. Well, not every, but a lot.
We've got a few choices.
All right.
A little bit of dust there, Paul?
Ready?
Yeah.
All right, so welcome to the Handy Guys podcast. Hopefully you've checked us out on YouTube. Check us out. We have a subscribe button. You can subscribe to us, see all our episodes. But today on this episode, Brian, I want to talk about sanders. And mainly because there are so many power sanders. That's what we're talking about.
Right. We're not talking about a block of wood with a piece of sandpaper and going at it.
Right.
Power sanders. And what are you going to use each of these different kinds of sanders for? When are you going to buy this kind versus this kind versus that kind?
Exactly. There's so many different varieties. And well, where do we start? I say we start with the belt sanders. You know why?
Why do you want to start with a belt sander?
Because it just sounds like something that, a guy would like. It's powerful. I got to get that belt sander out to do the job. Let's start with the most aggressive sander that we have out here.
That's
and
fine.
Then we'll move down.
So we've got two examples of belt sanders here. You have your Skill, and this is a Ryobi. These are both generally considered consumer models.
Right.
The thing with the belt sander, Paul, they take a lot of wood off very quickly.
Exactly. So usually they're very aggressive.
Yep.
I would use this, for instance, if I had a door that was sticking, and a wood door, and I wanted to take it scribe a little bit, take a little bit of wood off. I would use something like this. It doesn't have to be a perfectly detailed kind of job, but you're trying to get material off of something.
That's right. A lot of material quickly. Be careful on that door, though, because if you're on the edge, hold that board there for me, Paul. If this is not perfectly perpendicular to that edge of the door you're trying to take off, you're going to have a funny looking angle. And you also want to make sure you hit the entire area. Exactly. So you're going to want to keep this moving. Otherwise, you're just going to sink down in one place.
Now, if you want to use a belt sander for something like a woodworking project, where maybe you're trying to sand off the face framing and you want it to make it even with the carcass of your wood, you can use a belt sander with the finest belt that you can get, and you're going to want to get a high-end belt sander that's very big and heavy, because you don't want a lot of vibration and movement. You want to be able to control it. And I know woodworkers that use belt sanders, and they sometimes do use them, use the big, heavy, something with serious mass, and they're very expensive.
Right. One thing you'll notice about some belt sanders, both of these too, they're flat. You can operate them upside down.
Yeah.
So if you ever had to trim a piece of something off of, sand something here while this is upside down, you can do that.
I've noticed, though, with a lot of belt sanders, typically you need, if you want to get a lot of sanding done, you're going to need to pay for something that's a little more expensive, has a bigger motor in it.
And has the right size belt on it.
Yeah, true. Yeah, this one is the wrong size belt. But for a lower end belt sander, you're not going to have as much functionality. It's not going to be as strong enough to get through really hard woods and things like that.
Right, and it's not going to have the variable speed and things like that. Right. More commonly, Paul, the most common sander someone's going to buy if they buy a power sander is a random orbital sander, they call it. We got 3 different ones here.
These are all similar type sanders, random orbital.
Which means they'll turn and vibrate laterally.
Right, so they don't spin fast in circles. They more or less just vibrate in a circular motion back and forth. And what I really like about these sanders, you can see, you can buy sandpaper for them, and it's not necessarily brand specific. Your sandpaper on that branded model will fit mine. However,
the number of holes is different sometimes from one manufacturer to another.
It could be, yeah. So sometimes the holes are lined up differently. But what's nice is they have holes, so the sander will suck the dust back into a container. And
this one's full.
What I really like, Brian, is you can get hoses for these.
That's right.
I'm pulling this out, and our camera guy didn't know I was going to do this. But you can get hoses, hook them up to your shop vac, and then if you're doing work indoors, you run your shop vac, and you can sand. I used to use this on old baseboard molding in an old house.
Sure.
And I didn't have sand everywhere. I had a baby in the house. No one seemed to care, even though I had sand, lots of dust, but it was all being sucked up. So that's a nice feature.
But on these newer ones, like that one and this one, these bags built in do a pretty good job. You can see we've taken these on and off a couple times and gotten some sawdust on the workbench. But generally speaking, they work pretty darn
Yeah,
well.
and the one thing, I lent this to a family member.
Yes.
I won't name him. He used this a lot. Did sanding on some old redwood patio furniture.
Okay.
Refinished it, turned out great. But as a result, the pads don't stick anymore.
Oh no.
Not a problem. You can go on to Amazon.com or your local big box store, order a new pad. You just have to remove 3 screws. The new pad will go on, and then you got yourself new sticky.
Oh, now it's sticking a lot better.
Yeah,
there you go.
So it's just a few dollars. It's not very expensive.
That's a good deal. All right, now on to detail sanders, Paul.
Oh yeah.
So we got 2 different kinds of detail sanders here. We've got this guy and this guy. So this one here is really a multifunction tool. So it serves as a detail sander. So if you're sanding and need to get into a corner, you can very easily do that. And there's different saw blades and scraper attachments you can get for this as well. Or you can get a dedicated detail sander like this. Again, that'll be able to get into corners very easily.
Okay.
Or sand your whole project. It's not as aggressive though.
No, this is a dedicated sander. This is a multi-purpose tool, so you can get cutter blades and filers and all sorts of other things.
Exactly.
I like to use this for undercutting trim boards and things like that when I'm putting in new flooring. So this is a multi-purpose tool. This is simply a dedicated sander. It does not have the dust control.
No, it does not.
So this is kind of used for smaller projects. And the one thing I don't like about this is that this sander is very noisy for the amount of work that it accomplishes.
Okay.
Whereas the Orbital sanders I've noticed aren't as loud. So I really like them because you don't feel like you're blasting yourself with them.
This detail sander is pretty loud, as I recall.
Yeah, extremely loud. So this is not a dedicated sanding tool, but in a pinch you can use it in a tight
as a
area.
detail sander.
So there you go. Is that anything else we need to know about sanders?
We've got one other kind of sander that I didn't bring with me because I think it's probably the least useful.
Okay.
But it's a sheet sander. So you can get a sander that just uses 1/3 or 1/6 of a sheet of regular sandpaper, and they stick on there. The problem is the sheets are square, so it's hard to get into the corner.
Right.
This works better getting into corners than this does, and they're not as aggressive as a random orbital sander. So I would say that would be kind of your last choice. Random orbital sander is definitely, if you're going to buy one sander, it would be that one.
And there's one other sander, and that's a simple sandpaper, and get a sanding block or a piece of wood and go to town. Do it by hand.
That's right.
That's all we have this time for the Handy Guys podcast on sanders.
Thanks.